going on, guys? My name is Max, and this channel is all about trumpet education, covers, collabs, and much more. So if you're interested in that kind of content, drop a like and consider subscribing so you don't miss out on future videos. Alright, enjoy the video. Having been on Instagram posting practice videos for most of this year, I've been asked countless times what mouthpieces I use, why I use them, and whether or not I'd recommend them to anyone else. So in today's video, I'm going to give a more detailed description and comparison of all the mouthpieces I own and use. Before we get started, comment down below what mouthpiece you use as your daily player. I'm interested in hearing what mouthpieces you all prefer. The first mouthpiece here is the Monette Prana Resonance B6S1. The B6S1 was the first Monette model that I ever purchased from Monette. Initially, I bought the classic version of this mouthpiece, but over the summer I upgraded to the Prana model. Being most similar in size and dimensions to the popular Bach 3C and 5C, which I had previous experience with, BJ Cord from Monette recommended this model to me, and I found that many of the claims that Monette make about their mouthpieces remain true in my playing. Here's a listed example for how it sounds. The next mouthpiece I have here is the Monette Prana Resonance C6S1. I actually just bought this a couple weeks ago for my C trumpet, hence the C in C6S1. The dimensions of the C6S1 are identical to those in the B6S1. The only difference is in the length of the shank. Because the dimensions of the B6S1 were working pretty well for me, BJ just recommended that I go ahead and get the same model size for my C trumpet. So the reason that I got the C6S1 is because Monette mouthpieces are specifically designed for different keyed instruments, so their claim of constant pitch center, which I find pretty accurate for the most part, wouldn't apply if I were to use my B6S1 in my C trumpet. Here's a short listening example of how it sounds. This mouthpiece here is the Monette Prana Resonance B6LS1 with the L standing for lead. I actually got this mouthpiece a couple weeks ago as well. Rip my bank account. I purchased this mouthpiece to replace my other lead mouthpiece that I'll get to in a moment, but the dimensions of this mouthpiece are identical to those in the B6S1, and the only difference between both mouthpieces is in the cup depth. Monette describes the cup depth of the B6S1, my daily player, as a 5 out of 10, and the cup depth of the B6LS1 here as a 3 out of 10. The more shallow cup depth gives me a more bright and projecting sound in the upper register, which is more appropriate for settings such as lead jazz. Here's a quick example of how it sounds. This fourth mouthpiece here is a Yamaha Japan Bobby Shoe lead. I've used this mouthpiece for my lead playing for the past 1 to 2 years and have found pretty good success with it, although there have definitely been a couple issues that I've had with it. I would sometimes bottom out and my endurance would be heavily impacted, but then other times I'd be able to comfortably play in the upper register for a relatively long period of time, such as through a long concert or rehearsal, so that inconsistency was pretty problematic. Over the past year, I became a bit more aware of some of the bad habits that I was having while using this mouthpiece, and this in combination with the inconsistency in practicability and endurance and the fact that this mouthpiece is wildly different from my Monette connection made me switch over to the Monette Prana Resonance B6LS1. While I was trying to learn to adapt to play Monette mouthpieces in the past year, the unique characteristics of the Bobby Shoe lead, which I had to use on a weekly basis for lead jazz, were getting a bit in the way, and I wanted a more standardized approach to my playing. Nonetheless, here's a short example of how it sounds. This fifth mouthpiece here is a Monette Classic D4S. When I purchased my E-flat/D trumpet 2 years ago, this was the mouthpiece that it came with. Interestingly enough, this was actually the mouthpiece that got me into Monette mouthpieces in the first place. I used this mouthpiece to prepare my E-flat trumpet solos, and I found it to work pretty well, although now that I've not only found a Monette model size that works for me, but also upgraded to Monette Prana models, I need to find a Prana Resonance E6S1 that matches the dimensions and sizes of my other Monette mouthpieces. In a perfect world, I would also get a Monette Prana Resonance D6S1 for any music written for D trumpet, but I'm not made out of money, and it's no secret that Prana Resonance models can put a dent in your bank account. Anyways, here's a short listening example of how it sounds. The next mouthpiece I have here is the Bach 5C. I, like many people, played on the traditional Bach 5C for most of my middle and high school experience. I never had any strong problems with the 5C, although some of the smaller limitations, such as lowered pitch in the upper register, became a bit more prominent after I switched to Monette. I definitely wouldn't change the way I learned on my 7C and my 5C, but I'm glad that I eventually discovered Monette. Anyways, here's a short listening example of how it sounds. These next two mouthpieces I have are two plastic mouthpieces. This is the P Trumpet 3C and this is the P Trumpet 5C. These came with my P Trumpet many Christmases ago. I assume that the dimensions of these are similar to the dimensions of the Bach 3 and 5C, but I'm not 100% sure, so I wouldn't put my word on it. As one would expect, these plastic mouthpieces don't have the same warmth and depth as traditional metal mouthpieces, but I'm still surprised on how they perform. Here's a short listening example. Second to last is this cheap 7C mouthpiece that came with a Chinese trumpet. It definitely doesn't sound terrible, but it's absolutely not up to par with the Monette and Bach mouthpieces that I've showed you today. I'm not sure how well the sound quality will be picked up, but here's a short listening example. Last but not least is not a traditional style mouthpiece, but actually a mouthpiece visualizer. I'm not 100% sure of all the benefits of using one of these, but I found it a bit helpful in my free buzzing recently. Here's a short example of how it sounds. Thanks so much for joining me today. As always, feel free to comment down below any suggestions or content you'd like to see from me in the future. Also, I'd really appreciate it if you drop a like, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on future videos, follow me on Instagram where I post more often, and I'll see you guys in the next one.